The Kansas City Art Institute acknowledges that the campus is built on the ancestral territory of the Kikapwai, Osage, Kaw, and Ochete Shawkaween, the original caretakers of the land we're standing on today. Oto and Kanza are the two native languages of this land. We respectfully acknowledge the many peoples who have stewarded these lands, the lands we may know as Missouri and Kansas, throughout the generations. These stewards include the Kanza, Osage, Otos, Missouri, Shawnee, Chickasaw, Illini, Iowa, the Ochete Shawkaween, Kuapa, Potawatomi, Hopewell, and Mississippi peoples. We acknowledge the many peoples who have passed through or relocated near these lands. This includes the Wyandot, Cherokee, Delaware, Kickapoo, the Sac and Fox, Shawnee, and Potawatomi. We acknowledge that the land on which we gather at KCAI is land known as Cession Tract 123, ceded by the Great and Little Osage people in 1825. Before the Indian Removal Act of 1830, there were 7 recognized tribes in Missouri: Chickasaw, Illini, Iowa, Oto, Missouri, Osage, and Quapaw tribes. KCAI commits to recognize and strives to advocate for the more than 98 indigenous American tribes represented in the Kansas City metropolitan area.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Emory Douglas. As the introduction is shown, I'm about to show you a historical artwork, video or PowerPoint in the context of the work that I've done in the Black Panther Party, as well as the more recent work that I've been working on. First of all, I will start off with a introduction in the context of where the symbol of the panther come from, a brief introduction, and then I will go right into to my presentation. The symbol of the panther comes from the South, from Lowndes County, Alabama, in 1965 when the Voters' Right Act was passed. You had SNCC, Student for Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Some of the members went to Lowndes County, Alabama, a rural county, predominantly Black, 20,000 strong, 80% Black, run by the plantation mentality owner who ran the whole county. Blacks were basically a reading community, but learned through observation and participation. They were sharecroppers. They had always wanted to vote, but had been intimidated. So when the Student for Nonviolent Coordinating Committee came to Lowndes County in 1965, it was Stokely Carmichael and others. They reached out to those who lived there, and they were happy that they were there and wanted to organize in relationship to be able to vote. But they didn't want to be a part of the Democratic Party nor the Republican Party. So they started the Lowndes County Freedom Organization. And in order to be a political organization, you had to have an icon. What you see to your right versus the panther is a rooster. The white rooster was the icon for it stood for white supremacy. And it was the icon then of the Democratic Party. And so the Lowndes County Freedom Organization seen these high school sports teams and the symbols like lions and different animals as the mascots. Well, they chose the symbol of the panther. So the panther itself comes from the South during the Civil Rights Movement. This is Lowndes County, Alabama, where I was referring to, where they were organizing that. This is vote November. This is again Lowndes County. This is pre-Black Panther Party. Black Panther Party for self-defense back in the day. So this shows you what the historical context of the Panther comes from. Now I'll get into my presentation, some American history. What I'm showing you here is the initial images of the Black Panther Party newspaper, which is where most of the artwork that I did was in the interior or the back pages of the newspaper as it evolved. Initially, I did production work on the newspaper. I started on the first tabloid issue, which was this issue here. This was the first issue, which is a legal size sheet of paper. Here it was the first pig drawing, as people may be aware of the symbol, the pig. This is the image. Excuse me, let me start over again, please. I don't think I may have. Okay. Share screen. Share screen. Good evening, everyone. I may have, forgive me, I may have forgot to share my screen and was talking in advance of sharing my screen. But here is the beginning of the, if this is where you came in at, this is where we'll start at. This is the beginning of the presentation. As the artist for the Black Panther Party in the historical context, this is where I began to work on the Black Panther newspaper. 5 months after being involved in the organization in 1967, in May of May 15th, this was the first issue that I did production work, layout, paste up, cutting, or what have you. This was the first issue. This was the one done by Bobby Seale on a legal size sheet of paper, 8.5 by 11 during that time. This was the clip art that Hugh and them gave me because they used to talk about the swine, call the pigs a swine, and when they were out patrolling and observing the nature and attitudes of them towards the bad habits and nature towards the African American community. They started off with giving me this clip art, and I had to refine it, clean it up, because they wanted to put this pig image on the newspaper every week, but they were going to put a badge on it of the police that was bad actors in the neighborhood, so that people would know who they were. Eventually, it came to the point where they first defined the pig and what the definition of a pig was, as a low-natured beast that has no regard for law, justice, or the right of people, a creature that bites the hand that feeds it, a foul, depraved traducer, usually found masquerading as the victim of an unprovoked attack. In the early days also, and we began to call, because of the police viciousness, we began to call for community control of police in 1971. This is an image of then when we called for community control of police, which was what you hear that mantra today, police oversight boards, all of the discussions in relationship to negating the police altogether, refunding into community programs, all those things. Well, that basically comes from community control of police. In 1968, little Bobby Hutton, the first Panther, young man who was 15 years old, Huey Newton and Bobby Sue had to get a permission from his parents for him to join the party. He was murdered April 6, 1968 by the Oakland police, shot over 17 times. Thereafter, a couple of years later, we were able to get with the progressive and people board community politicians in Berkeley, California, and we were able to put on the ballot community control of police, to have the community vote on that ballot. It lost by 1 vote, but it brought attention to the need for that to become a reality. So this is where community control of police becomes the mantra across the country, because we had chapters and branches, and we were all over the country talking about community control of police. This is your local police, Black Power. It's all the same: local police, National Guard, Marines. All of this comes under Homeland Security today. So it's all the same. In 1968, there were many riots and rebellions that took place. There were over 300 rebellions in the United States that took place. And there were times when the police had to retreat from the community. And this is at the same time that you had the war in Vietnam going on. Here I used to spell America with 3 Ks, Amerikka. Of course, this is not original to myself, but I thought it was relevant to use with this illustration here. And it says, it's hell outside and it's hell inside. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Very intense periods during that period in time. The war in Vietnam, many rebellions taking place in the inner cities of the United States. This image is called, was during that time, Our Fight Is Not in Vietnam, Free the GIs. The Vietnamese wasn't causing unemployment. The Vietnamese wasn't causing inferior education. The Vietnamese wasn't lynching us. The Vietnamese wasn't exploiting us. So our fight was not in Vietnam. Our fight was right here in this country as it is today. Here are 2 images that I have on the same, I have several like this now with 2 different images. The one to the left is a caricature of then President Richard Nixon, and then Henry Kissinger, who was the Secretary of State. And you have them both laughing, saying, ha, 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 good old American peace. And they have the missile into the globe. And you got third world, Latin America, Africa, and Asia. Here's the one to the right. You got the hands choking the pig, saying, get out of the ghetto, get out of Africa, get out of Asia, get out of Latin America. US imperialism. Sometimes they were meant to be provocative in many ways. Here's one that has the US imperialists as the pig nursing all these little imperialists. All these countries were involved with the names on them, or involved or directly involved with the colonization of other people in the third world, other countries in the third world during that time. You got West Germany, you had Israel, Belgium, Portugal, Rhodesia, Japan, France, Denmark, Greece, all of these countries, South Africa, Great Britain, and others were directly involved in the colonization of people in the third world. Here's what it says, we deal a pig as, not a pig joint, but as a rat now, winding up his little toys, and the rat is the US imperialist, winding up his little toys, he's sending them off to war. They go to realize they're fighting the wrong war, and they come back and join the Black Panther Party and turn against the US imperialists because they realized they were fighting the wrong war. And so you have many ex-Vietnam veterans who joined the Black Panther Party. Here's another one, split screen to your left, showing the psychological impact of what war does to human beings. They have you believe that war is this amazing, patriotic, beautiful thing. When you got veterans of wars committing suicide every day in this country right now. 1, 2, or 3 in this country every day right now. The psychological impact of war. War is not a beautiful thing. US government approved. But also in the 60s, during the war movement, you had those who had peace with honor. They just refused to go. Some of them went underground, some went to prison, some left the country, but they just refused to go. Here's where using the word to describe America, a biblical word, Babylon. This is 1968, where you got the pig standing in the middle of the Pentagon, ready for overkill. Missiles between the toes, lynch rope in one hand, blood-sucking bullshit on the butt of the gun, hand grenade in the other, dollar bills drooling out the mouth, and the eyeglasses with dollar bill sign, standing in the middle of the Pentagon. In 1968, New Haven, Connecticut, you had 4 white students who were murdered by the National Guard at Kent, Ohio, New Haven, Connecticut. Let me go back again, excuse me. In New Haven, Connecticut in 1968, you had 2 Panthers who were set up by the government for the murder of another Panther, which they were exonerated of, and the agent provocateur was found guilty of. You had Kent, Ohio, at Kent State University. You had 4 white students who were murdered by the National Guard for protesting against the war in Vietnam. Augusta, Georgia, Jackson, Mississippi, and on many other campuses. You had Black students who were actual battles on those campuses with the authorities during that period in time. You had the war in Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and Palestine. So you had all these things and many more were happening in 1968. 1968 is a year that you have had lots of exhibits done around that period because of what is symbolically represented. Here again is talking about that issue. I believe this is at Cornell. This is actually 1968 photograph of Cornell University. Simply behind them demanding they want to have an ethnic studies, Black studies program. Such racist resistance in that context and threatens on their life that they had to arm themselves, protect themselves on the campus. So this was inspiration for this image that you see to the right. 1968, you had John Carlos and Tommy Smith, who went to the 1968 Olympics and gave the all power to the salute, which was in relationship to the human rights violations against the African American community in this country. 1972, the next Olympics, 4 years later, you had Vince Matthew, Wayne Collette, ignoring tradition at Munich Olympics. This was called At Ease. When they didn't won the race and became champions, they didn't cry crocodile tears, nor did they put their hand over their heart while they played the national anthem. They just stood there at ease with their hands on the hip, just at ease, rubbing their chin. This is inspired this image that was on the back of this particular paper called At Ease. Also inspired by the Olympics during that time was this image. I call it like a storyboard with no words, but tells a story through the sequence of images that you see. Here you have the runners get on the ground, they run the race. The winner comes to the winning, breaks the line, the winner's line. They're standing up on the podium. And when it's over, and he goes home, and when it's over, a nigger is a nigger is a nigger. No matter if you're Olympian, no matter if you're a doctor, no matter who you are, if you're Black in America, you've been profiled. And you're gonna continue to be profiled until we do something about it. You can take the example of Chicago, where it's over 600,000, particularly young Black and brown people were profiled simply because of their color. Less than 1% were found to have any contraband. But 45% of those whites who weren't searched had contraband. Here's that same image I showed you before, Our Fight Is Not in Vietnam. That same paper again, we shared with these young brothers called La Siete de la Raza, the Seven. There were some young Latino brothers in San Francisco Mission District who were charged with the murder of a San Francisco policeman, but they had no way to plead their case. And they weren't getting any help from anywhere, even in the interior of their community. So they came to us and they talked to Bobby Seale, and Bobby Seale agreed that we should work with them and help them. And they need to get their story out. So I was the one assigned to work with them to put their paper together so they could talk about their case. And for 4 or 5 papers, half of our paper was the Black Panther, the other half was the Bastille. I helped them show them how to lay it out. I didn't do it. Each one teach one. I shared my skills and explained to them, and they began to get the spirit of it themselves on how to put the paper, their part of the paper together. And so it was about 4 young ladies who, at that time, who came and worked on the paper, putting the paper together, called Bastille. Here again is one of the other papers that they put together. Here's the La Siete de la Raza, the Seven. They were eventually found not guilty of killing the San Francisco police, because it was shown that one of the other police was the one who shot and killed the other police. But the fact how it happened is just these youngsters were carrying some stuff into their house that was theirs. And they stopped them and tried to charge them with a crime and call them all disrespectful names, as they usually do. And from that created that tension and situation of the shootout and the police getting killed by the other police. We have got them a lawyer, Charles Gary, well-known lawyer, was our lawyer. He took the case up. So we got them a lawyer. We also did the newspaper with them. And I think in relationship to that, bring attention to the other organizations who were involved and got connected with it, like Angela Davis and many others, that they were eventually found not guilty. Boycott lettuce. This is when Cesar Chavez himself and the United Farm Workers were on their way to Sacramento, California, happened to be marching down the streets in front of our office. We heard them. We went out to see what was going on, and there was Cesar Chavez with the United Farm Workers on their way to Sacramento. And when on their way to Sacramento, they said that they were hungry and they wanted to know where they could get some food to continue on, because they were marching and picking up people along the way. And so they had about 35 to 50 people with them at that time. And so we worked it out for them to go to our school, which was about 30 blocks away, to have lunch. And we marched with them from our headquarters to our school and had lunch with them. And they continued on their way to Sacramento to protest against the chemicals that were being sprayed on the lettuce in the fields in the valley that was harming and impacting the health of the farm workers. So this next paper was this paper, Boycott Lettuce, to show our solidarity with that particular issue. We also worked with the United Farm Workers on other occasions when they were getting unionized and the stores were refusing to unionize them. So major chain stores here in the Bay Area, in California, in Oakland, California, we did the picket lines with them in relationship to them, forcing those stores to understand that they need to be allowed them to be unionized. Whatever's good for the person has got to be bad for us. This is when the Sputnik unmanned things were going up into space. And I want, and you have to visualize what that possibility that might be in the context of the evil manipulation mentality, scheming mentality of the slave master mentality of those who run this country. It said many of those who run this country. It says, and here they are up on the planet as they landed up on the planet, and what this could possibly mean. It says, hey, handle them slaves with care. We're gonna need them for Mars, Pluto, and all those other planets. And here you got the slaves getting off the slave ship, and they say, I knew we should have stopped this shit before it got off the ground. And over here you got the pig with the pick and the shovel. Said, okay, goddammit, don't take 400 years this time. That's in the context of slave labor and slaves being brought to this country, also contributing to the development of this country with slave labor. Here's one I play off of at last, was also once it got there, we were white only. But then you had to play this one in because here you have a president whose mentality is the same as that back then, today. Same nasty attitude, white only, at last. Save the children. This could be either of these images could be anywhere in America today or anywhere in the world today. This could be in Africa, this could be in Asia, this could be in Latin America. It is in Africa, it is in Asia, it is in Latin America, and it's here, right here in this country today. Here, when we're talking about, we want decent housing fit for the shelter of human beings. This is one of the 10 points of the Black Panther Party program. And this is one meant to be provocative in the context of the mother trying to protect her baby from the rodents as she shoot at the rat holes, and the rats are coming around sneaking up to attack the baby. So this is to bring attention to decent housing fit for the shelter of human beings. Here again to your right is another one that deals with that same issue and the psychological impact of the word freedom. Freedom is a word, you can be enslaved by the conditions and environment that you live in, psychologically in those conditions as well. Justice. We are soldiers in the army. We have to fight, although we have to die. We have to hold up the bloodstained banner. We have to hold it up until we die. My mother was a soldier. She had in her hand the freedom plow. And when she got old and couldn't fight anymore, anymore. She said, I'm going to get up and fight anyhow. My father was a soldier. He had his hand the freedom plow. And when he got old and couldn't fight anymore, he said, I'm going to get up and fight anyhow. Now, we all are soldiers. We have in our hand the freedom plow. And when we get old and can't fight anymore, we got to get up and fight anyhow. I just want to testify. I'm not going to sit around any longer. I got freedom on my mind. Freedom. This here is using a prefabricated borders that you use for certificates or something like that. Well, I just use them the way I choose to use them. And looks like a woodcut, but this was what you call that chipboard, where you paint the board ink and you can scratch off to get the feeling of a woodcut with the collage cut out, photo collage cut out. We shall survive without a doubt. These were Panther Cubs. Here in the glasses, we had the free breakfast for school kids. We had the free health clinics, sickle cell anemia testing, all these different things, social programs that we had. So this was kind of playing off of that right there. Here's one back in the day when we did register people to vote. It says, first one says, nothing from nothing leaves nothing. You got to do something, register to vote. This is back in the day. This is in the 70s, early 70s. This is the illustration I did for that. Here's again, when we say vote for survival, and you got the free food programs, free shoe giveaway, all these things. We always talked about vote for survival. A lot of people don't think that Hillary Clinton was the first woman to run for president. Shirley Chisholm was the first woman to run for president. Shirley Chisholm, we supported Shirley Chisholm. Shirley Chisholm came to the Bay Area and we held rallies for Shirley Chisholm when she ran for president. They tried to say that she shouldn't run because she's taking votes away and all this kind of, the language that's used that's laced with racism and bigotry is that kind of language. When you have a Black woman who's qualified, who's going to articulate what's going on, maybe not beyond that, but going to speak to those issues, they claim that she was taking votes away from those who were they claim to be the qualified. All power to the people. Showing a little, we have free health clinics, the free food giveaways, the free breakfast program, alternative schools. All of these different programs were inclusive of the Black Panther Party itself. Black genocide. This is sickle cell anemia. When we talked about, we tested over 100, free testing, we did over 100,000 free testing all across the country during that time. And you had people, a young man who was in the party who wrote this book, who recently passed away, say he had been ill all his life until he took the sickle cell test. And then he found out that's what his problem was, is he had the sickle cell. And this is a disease that predominantly impacts the Black community in the United States, here in the United States. And it's the sickling of the cells. And so this is, we did all, as you see, we did art around this to bring attention to it, the testing that we did, all those things. Germ warfare declared against Blacks. This is called the syphilis experiment. In 1939, they had this experiment that started with for syphilis because they had no cure for it. They had these Black sharecroppers. They gave them $50, which is a lot of money to them, to be in this experiment. So the experiment went on from 1940, 1940, 1947. They found a cure for syphilis, which was penicillin, but they didn't give it to the black sharecroppers. They kept them in the study until 1972. Some of them got ill, died, all kinds, you can imagine, from syphilis, the brain problem, all kinds of physical health problems, including death. 1972, you had these progressive reporters who could not really get it published in the mainstream media. So they brought these information to the Black Panther Party newspaper, along with other progressive alternative press. And as we began to publish it, it was thereafter that the study stopped. This paper was Saturday, August 5th, 1972. That's when the study stopped thereafter. We had a seniors program, Seniors Against a Fear-Filled Environment, where we pick them up from their satellite houses, take them shopping, take them to cash their checks at the bank. We had our school was called Oakland Community School, but in the evenings it became the Oakland Community Learning Center. The seniors used to have a program out of it called SAFE, where they could come, do dominoes, do all kinds of programming. And we would go pick up produce for them, bring it back there, and they could pick it up. All those kinds of things what took place with the seniors at this program. But here, this image was about when Oakland wanted to spend $54,000 on a helicopter, talking about patrolling crime in the community. But what we point out the contradiction here is that if you want to really stop crime in the community, you don't invest $54,000 in a helicopter to hoover over the community with no resources in the first place. But you take that $54,000 and you invest it in the young people to take the seniors shopping, to take the seniors to cash their checks. Then you begin to cut into crime. Today's news. And we got all these high rises going up, blocks and blocks. At the same time, we got blocks and blocks of homeless. Hypertension kills. I'm hungry. I'm unemployed. I'm Black. Down with exploitation now. Give me all my money. This was when cutbacks was coming back in the day. Here's images of mine, this amazing poster done by the Cuban artists of my work back in the day, and sent all over the world in solidarity with Afro-American struggles that were going on in the world, in particular in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And these are the two images that they remixed to come up with this amazing poster back then. Of course, we had no problem with that because it was about them sharing in the political sense and not exploiting it otherwise. Here again is another one. It's a solidarity with the African American people. August 18, 1968, 4 different languages. This image is the one that they used. As you see, they remixed it, flipped it around. This was in the interior of the Black Panther newspaper. It was black and white as you see it here. But they took it, redesigned it, and made it into this amazing poster. Afro-American solidarity with the oppressed people of the world. This image was just listed by artists and curators and a few others in the New York Times article of the, I think it was the 25 impactful posters since World War I believe, in relationship to the impact. And this was shows us number 12 in that context. The conspiracy to destroy the Black Panther Party, COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program. You had an FBI agent named Swearinger who acknowledged that they had in the FBI, that they had a unit called Racial Matters, that you had to dislike and hate Blacks to be a part of that unit. He was saying they're the ones who were doing all the murders and all the dirty tricks that were done during that time on the Black Panther Party. Government spent over $27 million to destroy and discredit the Black Panther Party by any means necessary, calling our Black Panther Party free breakfast program public enemy number one. The murder of Fred Hampton, Chicago Panther. In the background, Mark Clark, the brother who was in charge of the Illinois Southern chapter of the Black Panther Party. You can get more online on YouTube on this history, on this film, The Murder of Fred Hampton. Trick or treat, pig, trick or treat, trick or treat. This is during Halloween, and thought it would be ideal to highlight the president, Richard Nixon, and the vice president, Spiro Agnew, who both had to leave office in disgrace. Both criminals running the government, reflection of 50 years ago. Criminals. Richard Nixon was going to be impeached, so he resigned. He left impeached. Spiro Agnew had to leave. His vice president had to leave because he was a criminal, and he got kicked out when he was the vice president. This one in the playoff. I wonder if Nixon is bugging us now. This one says, I wonder if Trump is spying on us now. I, Gerald Ford, am the 38th president of the United States. Corporate greed run the government. The president is a figurehead, included in that. He's the puppet for that. This is what controls and dictates the policy of the United States. And its interests and conflicts across the world. Here you have King Nixon, corporate profit, is still spending, all that going up. Consumer buying power going down. 50 years later or more, same thing, corporate profit, defense spending off the radar. That's probably the number one money maker in the world for the United States government, is selling military weapons and guns and what have you. Consumer buying going down. Class brothers. Richard Nixon cabinet coined the word black capitalism. Was saying that if Nixon cabinet coined the word, it ain't about too much of nothing in it. It ain't about too much, really. So if you chop down U.S. imperialism, black capital ain't nothing but a weed. It's gonna fall over too. Prison camps, USA, the unknown slaves. Here we're talking about, today, we're talking about the prison industrial complex. When you talk about the prison industrial complex, you're talking about profit and making money. And when you talk about profit and making money, you have to have a product in order to make money. So you have to have a product on your shelf and enough product in order to make a profit. So that means that in the context of the prison industrial complex, there are gonna always be people who are gonna be incarcerated in prison, because you have to have a certain amount of people incarcerated for it to be profitable. My suffering, my bitterness, my loneliness, I'm not going to let it get me down. I'm not going to let it turn me around. Why must Black people look at each other? Where is our freedom? He's in both in minimum security, maybe family, both of them in maximum security, and maybe family is in minimum security. Political prisoners USA, Bobby Seale and Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, both, that's Huey Newton, this is Bobby Seale, both back in the day. Free the New York 21. This is when they began to set us up with all the phony charges. New York 21 set up with over 100 and something charges that were eventually dropped, and they were found guilty of, not guilty on all the charges. We supported Angela Davis, Free Angela, back in the day. George Jackson lives. George Jackson was a brother who went to prison as a common criminal, became enlightened and became politically conscious in the prison, and became a real revolutionary and political force. And they assassinated him in prison. We were introduced to him via Angela Davis during that time, and he wanted to start a chapter of the Black Panther Party in San Quentin. So that became the first chapter of the Black Panther Party inside prisons, was in San Quentin prison. This is kidnapped. This is dealing with the fact, a long story, but I won't talk about it because of the time and getting into some others. But this is when Bobby Seale was kidnapped and took back to Chicago. The film called The Chicago 7. If you see it, you see it online now on Netflix. And it tells that story, a very powerful story. So look at that film, or you can look at stuff on the Chicago 7, and you will it was really the Chicago 8, because Bobby Seale was the 8th defendant in that case. And this was my interpretation, excuse me. This was my interpretation of what took place in the courtroom. A Black man has no right that a white racist system is bound to respect. That's based on the Dred Scott case back in the day. You can read historically on that as well. Again, this is when Bobby was in New Haven, Connecticut, when they really were trying to put him into the gas chamber. He and Erica Huggins both were back in New Haven, charged when I talked about the murder of the Panther in New Haven, that eventually the agent provocateur was found guilty of, and they were exonerated all those charges. So they tried to set them up because they were leaders of the organization. And they really were trying to execute Bobby Seale in the lecture chair. So I had to do this image here. And I seen this book, and it came to me when I seen this book from the 1930s of all these executions in lecture chairs. So I found one that I could drop out all the contrasts in. I could integrate work into and touch up. And I took a photograph of Bobby Seale and placed it in the same direction. And that became Bobby Seale to get the message across in relationship to what they were trying to do, execute Bobby Seale in the lecture chair in New Haven. Hallelujah, the might and the power of the people was beginning to show. This is when Bobby and Erica was released from prison in New Haven, Connecticut. We always show our respect for the original caretakers of this land. So we had a close relationship with AIM, American Indian Movement, who acknowledged that they were inspired by the Black Panther Party in relationship to their vision and their becoming together as the American Indian Movement. And so this was one of the images we always did. We have several that we've done. I've done in the paper designing. Of course, the images and photographs I compiled from other sources and put it together to make this image here. Now I'm going into the more recent works that I've done. Say maybe some remixes from 80s, but most of the stuff I've done 90s up until 2020. And this is a remix of the Panther image that I have a t-shirt I've done on that. But this is just it. I call this Malcolm X the warrior. Panthers were inspired by Malcolm X. I did this one because this is October 15th, 1966 is when the Panthers originally started as the Black Panther Party for self-defense, and then became, in 1968, changed the name to the Black Panther Party because I became more in politics and what have you. So this is about that, and it says the only solution to pollution to human pollution is people's human revolution. That's the quote from Bobby Seale. And this is a quote from Huey Newton. And it says, the spirit of the people is greater than the man's technology. Here's one, Malcolm X. I did one of him smiling. And I also did one of Dr. King. Here's one highlighting the community, people in the community who were a reflection in the artwork, who saw themselves in the artwork, and then they became the heroes in the art themselves. Because of that, they read the papers and looked at the stuff because it identified with them as well. They became more informed and enlightened by looking at the paper, not just on a domestic level, but on a national and international level. And so I reinterpret these, remix these again from images that I photographed that we had many years ago. And I remixed it recently again. So to be up to date with, so like I said, today's news, SOS global warming, protect Mother Earth on the back, justice, resist unjust laws, those kinds of things that are relevant in the language that fits today. Over here, it's all power to the peoples, global warming, and it's talking about decent housing, jobs, all those things right there. Here we are living in the land of plenty while we, the people, starve. Don't support the greedy. The sharecroppers, our family, I remember as a kid, I had uncles and aunties who worked in those same valleys that the sharecroppers work in today. Those same locations did the same work back then, 50 years ago. You just have the blessings come through the community to pick up people who wanted to go during the summer on the weekends to pick fruit or what have you, to make money so that you can pay the rent, buy the kids' school clothes. Educate to liberate, freedom. Turtle Island, North America, indigenous territory. All this is Turtle Island that we live in. Health is wealth. I like to sing, yes, non-toxic. I'm food insecure. I'm homeless. This is what you get the sense of today. Young people have no food, families barely make it surviving. Some of them living in their cars or extended family houses up with families because they've been put out. Children are hungry. All these things exist in real time. Here is the Black Panther Party, October 1966, 1982, showing the many social programs that we were involved in. Free busing to prison program, had almost a Greyhound bus in Chicago, like with the free busing on the side and the Panther. But we also had cars and vans that also took loved ones of those or those who needed a ride, got it for free. We just tell them where they come on that weekend and what prison we would be going to. They get a free ride to those prisons. In Winston-Salem, we had a free ambulance service. The ambulance wouldn't come into the community. So the communities Panthers went and got certified, and the community helped them procure an ambulance. So we had the Black Panther Party Community Ambulance Service in Winston-Salem, actual ambulance service. We had the Panther free food giveaway, thousands of bags of groceries at a time, or less, depending on what chapter they could do at that particular time. I had the seniors program, the free health clinics. We had liberation schools. Then we had our own alternative schools and what have you. That's a whole nother story. There's again, survival pending revolution, the more recent interpretation of what I did. And this is again showing the free bus in the prison, the ambulance service, the free food program, free clothing program, free breakfast for children served here Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. This is a remix, and I put the COVID on it because it connected to today. what's happening, people's free health clinics. Yeah. This is called survival pending revolution. Well, and that's still the reality at this time. Father's love, mother's love, reparations. This symbol here is a symbol, an African symbol, a Dinkra symbol. It represents you are a slave of him whose handcuffs you wear. And this word is figures spelling the word reparation, and these figures with chains, red, white, blue chain connected to the figures. This here is fascist xenophobe, and this is beyond redemption right here. Both of them fit the same thing. Here's when he talked about shithole countries, Africa, Asia, particularly black countries, call them shithole countries. Well, this is a shithole president. Immigration, white only. Still dealing with the issue of border, ice cold wickedness, made in the USA. Mothers, fathers separated from the babies. Babies dying inside these ICE prisons. Mama, mommy, papa, poppy, crying, howling. Still over 500 children displaced from the families, don't know where they are. Some have been deported already. Netanyahu, Trump, guilty. This is from the dictionary. Ethnic cleansing, the mass expulsion or killing of members of an unwanted ethnic or religious group in a society. This is solidarity, hashtag BDS, down with apartheid. Peace heals, war kills. This is one that I did for Spike Lee's movie, The Five Bloods. This is one of the posters that they used in PR, not necessarily primary poster, but in some form or shape when they were doing the PR. I was asked to work with this. Also, there's a film documentary. You can see it on YouTube, I think about 7 or 10 minutes, where me and Spike came to the house here. And when I remember when he emailed me, I didn't know who it was. I thought it was fake email. And so I didn't respond. Then he emailed me back and said, this is real Spike Lee. Then that's when I responded and we came together and the whole thing, process took place thereafter. Here's what war does to human beings. Here's what war, this is what war does. This is what war does. Amputees, landmine. You got thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that we don't see and don't hear about who are handicapped because of landmines all over the world. They're still there from past and recent wars that's taking place right this day. Mother Earth. This is the doomsday clock interpretation, where we've been almost 2 minutes to 12 and no return and back to where we were. You got glaciers melting, all this now. You got places and islands where people will not ever live in the next, maybe after this year, but in the next 5 years, guaranteed. This is global warming. Both of these dealing with global warming. Respect Mother Earth. Black Lives Matter, Justice Now. Black Lives Matter. Arab, Muslim, Islam, government's coded word for terrorist hate, discrimination. Black male, US government's coded word for hate, discriminate, kill. As much as things change, some things stay the same. Why do they get to brutalize and murder us and we get to blame? Police terror, USA. That's the initial one I did. This had a barcode on it for a Metro Pass, and this was related to the Oscar Grant murder that took place in 2009 on the BART station. Thereafter, I remixed this image here to continue it on. The Black Code. A Black person has no rights, which an institutional racist judicial system is bound to respect. It gives the appearance of being fair and just when the biased decisions have already been made, been decided. This is a collaboration with Aboriginal artist Richard Bell in Australia, in Brisbane. They wanted us to do that 1968 interpretation of John Carlos and Tommy Smith because the white athlete who ran second in that race was named Peter Norman. He was from Australia. He was in solidarity with John Carlos and Tommy Smith. He wore the Olympians badge for human rights. Thereafter, when he came back to qualify for the 1972 Olympics, he still had the best time in Australia. But they blacklisted him and wouldn't allow him to run again at all because he supported John Carlos and Tommy Smith in the 1968 Olympics. A lot of people may not be aware, but the apartheid triangle that was in South Africa was between Australia, New Zealand, and that was in South Africa. That was the apartheid, called apartheid triangle. This is done in relationship to the pre-Olympics. When the massacre, a lot of people don't know, pre-Olympics 1968, you had students who were massacred and slaughtered just prior to the Olympics in Mexico City. They tried to claim 50, 60, but some, they say it's over hundreds. They say, well, bodies and bodies were being taken out. It was set up. It's the whole story. You can find it online. But I just wanted to acknowledge that in the artwork because the Pentagon sent radios, weapons, ammunition, and riot control training material to Mexico before and during the riot, during the massacre. Here I am in Chiapas. I'm being introduced to the Zapatistas in their store. We come back a year later, and 18 and 19 of us, we paint this store. And it's about solidarity, culture, unity, all those things are the theme of the work, health, medicine. These are some of the Zapatista dials that you see that are insulated here on the poles, display themselves. These images and that image there are my contributions to the work. They were Zapatista, people of the corn, and they're humorous and the whole bit. So this was my contribution. These are 5 of the images of my graphics that interpreted by the Mayan, Zapatista Mayan Women Collective. Embroideries, they're 20 by 30 inches each. And I was invited to Chiapas by Idelo Art Center, which was run by Caleb Duarte back in the day, and been there 4 or 5 times thereafter. This is Allendale Elementary School in Oakland, California, after giving the presentation, which I do a lot at schools whenever invited. This is in Manchester, England, where I went to do a master class with the young people whose art was also included in the exhibition that took place there. These are low esteem, building up their esteem in relationship to through art. This is the exhibition in Urbiston, Manchester, England. You had desks with reading material that we were required to read, that people connected to that each desk. So when people came in, they wanted to read what the Black Panther Party was required to read. They could sit at the desk and they could read some of those materials. You had the audio, video clips. You had amazing exhibition all throughout this exhibition. Uh, Here's opening night of the exhibition itself. It went on from October 2008 to April 2009. It had over 43,000 people attend that exhibition. This is in New Zealand, on the streets. Elam International School of Fine Arts. I was invited there to do an artist in residency. I was invited for 41 days, but there was so much interest in my political activity as a Panther that I traveled the North and the South Island for 41 days talking about that history and doing presentation in conjunction with some of the art students there. This is in New Zealand also when they were talking about an issue at one of the libraries concerned about land grab and taking indigenous land being used and exploited. And they were trying to work out some ideas of some kind of illustration for poster action that they could do. And they were just asking me for some of my input and suggestions. This is also when I was there and I was invited to all boys Samoan school, amazing art school, unbelievable artist. This is a symbol when Wayne Yule, Maori artist, did a collaboration with him while also in New Zealand, been back 4 or 5 times. And I read this where about the twist symbol being a single symbol. It represents you may go in different paths, but you always come back together. So I mentioned that. You saw that's just a plain symbol. So I had to figure out how I was going to make it have some impact. And so I took the symbol and the Maori flag and connected them together to come up with my artwork for the exhibition. And this is what I interpreted as overcoming oppression is our path to unity. And this is basically what it says in Maori in general. This is when I was in Argentina. Trimarchi invited for young people to do a talk. They had interpreters there, professional interpreters, 2 big major screens. We're in a national basketball stadium in Mar del Plata on the coast. And the amazing young people, 5,000-6,000 young people, skateboarding outside, music in the corridors, nothing but young artists, amazing. This is after I gave my presentation. I was trying to figure out why I wasn't so appreciative. And after I figured that, I thought about it for a while. It came to me that they could see in the artwork the inspirations for some of the things that they're going on in their lives, in their country, that they want to begin to deal with. This is in Portugal. This is in Lisbon, Portugal. As you go up, they had an art of each image of my work on each level. This one is in Nottingham, contemporary in Nottingham. When I did there to do a talk, they had a Jean Genet symposium, but they wanted me to come to do a talk about the work and what have you. This is in Bogota, Colombia. This is where announcing the exhibition in Bogota, which was amazing. You go up and down the streets of where it was at the bank. It had amazing displays about the work. You can see it coming up and going down the streets. This is in Sao Paulo, Brazil, where I had a made unbelievable, a place called Sessi. This is when you go in, you see the elevators. They had about 10 elevators with decorated with the work itself. This is getting prepared for the installation inside for the exhibition. These are opening night images of the exhibition. This is in Oakland, California. These are 9 artists who come together. I was invited by an American Israeli artist. Her name is Susan Green, who did the work of the Palestinian sister who was not allowed to come to do her work, but her work was interpreted by her. You had an Afrocentric artist, you had Japanese American artists, Arab American artists, you had indigenous artists, you had artists from Jordan, you had all amazing um, artists working together with a whole collective of other artists and people who made contributions to this whole mural project that made it work. And this was artists in solidarity with Palestine, or artists for Palestine. And this was my contribution, Free the Land, as this one here. This is thereafter, making a photograph with the young Palestinian kids. Free the land by any means necessary, boycott, divest, down with apartheid. This is in Arusha, Tanzania. Pete and Charlotte O'Neill, some of you know in Tanzania. I've been there about 3 or 4 times and they wanted to do this picture to be the integral part of a overall image that we worked on. The last mural I've done, don't plan to do anymore anywhere. Too rough, too tough on the body in 77, but just maybe work with young people and give suggestions, those kinds of things. This is 1%, less than 1% of youngsters today, endangered species, mental bondage. That same image, I went back again to New Zealand and collaborated with some young folks there. And they have gangs there, just like they have gangs here. But they wanted to deal with the peace sign as a they don't call them tattoos, they call them mocha. And I'll just say tattoos. Wanted to design with the tattoos as opposed to some of this other decorative images, because they were talking about peace and coming together. The young people, yes. This is Tommy Iti, well-known activist. My first trip to New Zealand, met me at the airport, he and Chaz Doherty and others, and took me straight to the Marae and gave me an official welcoming to the land. And each time I go, I always go visit and connect with Tommy and others. Here's what these youngsters don't realize what they're getting into today when they get into the prison system. Modern day slavery, prison industrial complex, private property, justice, freedom, innocent. This here is Mumia Abu Jamal, political prisoner. This is Leonard Peltier. Leonard Peltier, Native American, indigenous political prisoner, symbolizing other political prisoners who are still incarcerated, including about 10 other Black Panther Party political prisoners who are still incarcerated. Free political prisoners, freedom fighters, USA, fighters for peace, justice, freedom, particularly the struggle against recognized cruel and oppressive conditions, government's inhumane policies and action. This is the Lone Roray Hansberry Hotel in Tennessee, where Dr. King was murdered, assassinated. It's an exhibition place for the civil rights and human rights. And when they officially opened it, they wanted to have the image, all power to the people, and as a part of the installation there. And so we worked out an agreement for them to paint it and have it there at the location. And this is last and finally one called All Power to the People. This is a remix, an interpretation. I'm trying to make it relevant to today with the young lady having in her hand maybe a little cell phone or something like that. Okay, thank you very much. This was the last of the presentation.
All right, Emory, thanks so much for such an amazing and inspiring presentation. Totally worth it. We were so happy and privileged to be able to have you at KCAI. So thanks for all of your time and effort on that, and also for all the other engagements, lending your work to the gallery exhibition, which is still going on, and roundtable coming up, and all those activities. It's been great, the poster workshop. So thank you for that. We have a few questions here. I want to open up the Q&A here. So the first one is a question from Michael. He says, thanks, Emory. I was wondering if you could talk about the chapters of the Black Panther Party around the country, in particular in Kansas City, and how you connected with them in relation to your duties as Minister of Culture.
Well, Pete and Charlotte early on, you're talking about the earlier part of the history days when that chapter started. But when it started, they came to California, to Oakland, California, and that's where I met Pete and Charlotte then in Oakland, California. I never met them with Kansas City. I wasn't traveling during that time because the fact it was the beginning of the paper, and they were said they wanted me to focus on getting the paper out until we evolved and got more people to work on the paper. So I met Brother Pete and Sister Charlotte when they came out to Oakland during that time. But the link to party members always was our inspiration in what we were doing and what we were about. So that was the commonality that we had. It never not necessarily that we had to see each other, but Renee knew of Panthers and knew of what we was doing and never seen each other, but had the mutual respect.
Just to follow up on that a little bit, what were those connections like? Did people travel out to California to visit with you and other leaders there, or was correspondence via mail?
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Was there much mail correspondence as well, or was it mostly face to face when they would travel to visit you guys?
Well, initially, when somebody wanted to start a chapter, they probably called and say or send a letter saying they wanted to be Panthers, or they wondered how they can come to be Panthers, and they had so much of that, so you had to figure out structures and ways as you evolve and grow how to manage that and to make it. So you had, not knowing who the folks were, you had to make sure you know who they were. So sometimes they would send folks from the Panthers to go check them out, but 100% of the time, at some point, people had to come to the headquarters in Oakland, California, and they had to stay for at least a week or two to observe what was taking place structurally at that time. We had political education classes, we had to sell papers, we had the free breakfast programs, they had the work and all those things. And they would talk a lot with maybe Huey, Bobby, and others, but they also went out into the field and did daily work. So that way they had the sense of how to structure things in the context of where they lived at and where they were from and the chapter that they were starting. And they had to send in reports, weekly reports on what was going on. There was always telephone communications back and forth. So it was not an isolated sense of a chapter being isolated, yeah. And they were sending articles and materials in to be published into the paper about what was happening on local level.
Great, thank you. Laura asks, what is your advice for younger artists? What do you wish for those who are just beginning their work and careers?
Well, I wish they'd be successful, one. That's priority, because you take everything to be a job, but I also wish at the same time as the second part of one is that you hopefully have a consciousness enough of a passion enough to want to integrate into whichever you do something that has compassion and understanding for those less fortunate, and in the context of transforming the society into a more inclusive society and negating all this insanity that's going on and reflecting that into the world, into your artwork.
Great, thank you for that, Emory. Anyone else have any other questions? While we're waiting on a few to come in here, I have a quick one about the programs that you guys offered. There's so many aid programs that were incredible that you guys did totally on your own. And I wondered if you had a sense of where the funding came from, to get an ambulance, to pay for a bus, to pay for all the food, those kind of things. Was that all just fundraised within the community?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, we had at that time, if you look at some of the field, you can see we had great communicators and people who could articulate to folks. But at the same time, when people would come who were inspired by what we were doing, they would invite us to colleges, university, to do talks, those kinds of things. Then we had Panthers who came out of certain environments in the Hollywood sets and those kinds of things, who know people who were progressive minded, who wanted to contribute to the cause as well. So it was many variables that played into the fundraising, what we did during that time. I mean, because at the height of the school, it was I was about $50,000 a month budget that was independent of the Black Panther Party, because the school was just the school that was created by the Black Panther Party, coordinated by the Black Panther Party, but we had all connection to many administrators and stuff who is like the school, who contributed to the school being a success. You have people like Maya Angelou, who used to come and got pictures when I do about the programs. I got a whole thing I do on the social programs. I got showing Maya Angelou in the class talking with the kids. That's back then in the day, So we had Sheila E., well-known performer who used to say Alameda, used to come over and do before she was famous and contribute at the school. You had Grace for Dead, done kind of sports for them, John Lee Hooker, all Albert Abby Lincoln. There's so many through that school, and it was integral part of connecting with other links. But at the same time, we in the real early days, it was selling posters and prints and books that different Panthers had published during that time to raise funds. And then we had developed our own printing operation where we could print everything except for a newspaper. It had a guy came in and gave a brother named Benny Harris, who was in the Panther, he was a genius, gave him a press that had nothing on it, but like the car, beyond with no windows, no engine, no nothing, just up on 2 blocks. Well, he gave him that press. He went and got the book, and he put that whole press together. And that became our printing press. We could print up to maybe 18 by 24 sheet, single sheet papers. And so we did a lot of our own printing, developed our own dark room. Then we also had our own community printing operation from that, where we could undercut about 50%, or if they had to go outside the community, which a lot of people couldn't afford. So we were able to do a lot of community printing as well. So all that played into the.
That's amazing. That amount of resourcefulness is incredible and really admirable. Brenda Rogers says, thank you so much.
Together and brainstorming, that comes out of that. And when you got the structure set up, then you can say what the possibilities of the structure can do. And when you got the manpower, the body power to do that, then you implement it to see if it's going to work or not. And you can evaluate it and come back and see if it's working or not, or if it is, how you can improve on it. All those things. Yeah. But you have to put it in. We always said theory and practice. You had to put it into practice no matter what.
Yeah. Okay, next question. We got I'm getting a backlog here of questions. A lot of excited participants here. Jordan says, Emory, thank you so much for your presentation. What has changed today when it comes to visual messaging for activists?
Well, I can only speak for myself. I wouldn't want to speak for activists. I'm not the spokesperson for activists. I'm trying to do what I can to maybe people be inspired by it, to be inspired with, and they can begin to do likewise in the context of how they feel and want to express what they do as a creative person. But I have to try to make the work relevant to the context of what's going on today. In that context, It's not about historical, it's historical context from the reference to be inspired, maybe be inspired by, but in the context of trying to make it relevant today so that it can shift the mindset and focus on how maybe we can apply it today to make it relevant and inspiration on a local level, on a national and an international level. Yeah. And you got more special interests that you have to understand too, that you have to deal with in the context of social justice art that comes together as the oneness today as well. Then you could just say more one kind of thing, police abuse, which is predominantly the thing today that's bringing a lot of people together, injustice. But you also got the high rates of the COVID, unemployment, and all those aspects of things that are taking place today. Yeah.
Definitely plenty to communicate about.
Yeah.
Okay, a couple of questions from Lisa. She says, what are you working on now?
Well, I'm retired, but I do work when I feel like it.
I don't know if anyone believes you're retired.
So I just finished the project that I worked on with the San Francisco Art Commission. I worked with Magnolia Editions in Oakland, who did the fabrication of it. I worked on that. Yeah, I did that. I'm working on, and maybe that image you said, Survival Pending Revolution, that was a remix that I recently created from historical artwork. So I do a lot of that as well. I got some folks who want me to do some work, but what I do, kind of work I do is they ask me to play murals and stuff. I can remix or reinterpret stuff that I've done or something I may have put aside that I haven't, and get back to it, and it might fit what I'm trying to work on now. So I just did a collaboration with the Aboriginal and Maori artist in New Zealand on a mural project that they're gonna put online that they're gonna do next year, because I forgot to mention that the Polynesian Panthers, which were official chapter of the Black Panther Party in 1971, and it's connection with them that I'm doing work, contributed to the project. And so, stuff like that every now and then. Then I'm always tinkering, maybe on my computer, playing around with something I've done, remixing, those kinds of things. Yes. But I try to do it in the context that it's not stressful, where it ain't got no major right now deadlines.
Right. Question from Michael. He says, Mr. Douglas, thank you for being with us. Who were your early artistic influences before you joined the Black Panther Party?
Well, I remember when my mom, she was legally blind. She could see something, but she could see. So I used to stay a lot with my auntie. And she had this calendar as a kid that I used to see that she used to get every year from this insurance company. And it had this black art on it. And I was intrigued by it, but I never knew who it was until I got older, and it was Charles White, the well-known artist back then, he got some amazing work. If you look him up, you'll see his work. So he kind of, that was the inspiration as a youngster, was that. And then being in the Black arts movement before the Black Panther Party, there were many artists who were doing all types of art. And so I became inspired by that. Yeah.
Related to that question on the more political side of things, Marie wants to know, were there any models that the Black Panther Party were following, or history that they were looking to collectively, or was everything invented and developed as you guys needed it?
Well, it was invented and developed, but we were inspired by the Chinese Revolution and the Red Book, because the principles in it were universal. And then the reason why, because Huey Newton, the Bible Seer, used to sell it to the students at UC Berkeley because they used to like to read it. And they raised money in the initial days of the organization. And so there were universal principles in there that we would read and guided by, that we transformed into our own language in relationship to how we did things and what have you. Pay for everything you borrow, return everything you borrow. Don't steal a needle or a piece of thread from the masses. All those kinds of things, and reinterpret those things into how a language, into our rules and regulations that we had.
Okay, thank you. Michael wants to know, can you talk about your transition after the Panthers to work across the globe and have your creativity move from newspapers and posters to major exhibitions and art galleries? Does the art change when it's in a gallery rather than in a community?
Well, I guess in the context of being in that environment, but as far as the message stays the same. It just gives a broader audience to see and view the message, and to bring a better interactions and context and discussion about the work itself. So in that context, you have a broader audience, maybe you have a broader perspective on how people view it and interpret it. Yeah. But for me, the art is not being changed simply because it's in the gallery. To take something out, it's not being in any way manipulated. It's the same art that they choose. That's what it is. That goes in the gallery. Yeah.
Okay. Brenda says, I noticed cowrie shells in some of your pieces. Was there spiritual influence in the Black Panther Party, like IFA?
Well, I know they were kind of maybe in a way just knowing about the carol shells and aspects on myself on a limited basis, knowing the cultural identity with it. Yeah, I guess you could say if maybe it was interpreted that way, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
But there wasn't any direct spiritual influence within the party and the leadership or anything?
Well, it was, but you have to understand the Black Panther Party was unique. The Black Panther Party had people who came in the party who were atheists, who were Christians, who were Buddhists, who were Rastas. Some didn't just believe in anything, but was able to set that to aside to work together. So that was the dynamics, the powerful dynamics of the Black Panther Party. It transcended belief systems in the context of what it come together to do. And people were inspired by the change and working together. Yeah. Now, a lot of people have gone back into their belief systems since then, those who, but in the party, and it wasn't forced on anybody.
Okay, thank you. Michael wants to know, how did you get involved initially in the Black Panther Party? Did you attend Merritt Community College with Bobby Seale and Huey Newton?
No, I didn't. I was here in San Francisco. I came to San Francisco in 1951. I'm 77, so I was born in 1943. But I came to San Francisco in 1951, and most of my time was in San Francisco. But when I was going to City College of San Francisco and got involved with the Black arts movement and the Black conscious movement, which began to start around 65, or really high in 65, 66, 67, particularly on the campuses when they began to want to change the names of the Negro student unions to the Black student unions, which initially that was started with San Francisco State College in San Francisco, because it became, I believe, the first or the second Black student union in the United States. I think it's either Mississippi State or that one was San Francisco was the first. And going out there all the time, seeing all the stuff that was going on, and being in the Black arts movement, was a United States and beyond movement during that time. And I was doing character sketches and those kinds of things, of personalities. There was a group of people who were trying to bring Malcolm X's widow to the Bay Area, to Sister Betty Shaz, to honor her. And some guys who I knew who were highly frustrated with what was going on during that time. The police murders and always being justified as it is today. We had to come together to figure out what we could do. So one of them was going to San Francisco State and had been going to that meeting where they were planning on the event for Sister Betty Shabazz, and contacted me saying they wanted me to come to do the artwork for that event. When I went to do the agreed, at that meeting, they said they were going, some brothers who may be coming over from Oakland to the next meeting to agree to do the security for that event. When they came over, that was Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, and they agreed to do the security. It was after that meeting that I asked them how I could join. And they had a business card. I didn't have a card in. I used to catch the bus over to Huey's house. And this is in late January of 1967, about 3.5 months after it started, organization had started. And at Huey's house, then from Huey, we go hang out. He introduced me to folks in the neighborhood. We go by Bobby Seale's house. That was my first transitioning from in the Black Arts movement into the Black Panther Party. So you can say late January, early February 1967. And this is still about 4 or 5 months before the paper came out in May of 1967.
Now, was there, when you first met them, was there something about them wanting you to get started immediately on some work? It seemed like in some of the
Well, I mean, it was just inspiring because what happened is just a matter, when I first came around, I was just like everybody else, you had all kinds of folks trying to figure out what they were going to do. And so when I became involved and started hanging out, they had already been organized. They had been going out on the patrols and defining what was going on with those patrols. And being able to go out on those patrols, because they say, well, you go as an observer now, because you're just coming around, and we have already been trained to do this. So you won't be coming with technical equipment, you become as an observer initially. And so when they used to go on patrol, it was done in a manner that was where they would see people being harassed, assisted brothers and sisters being harassed in the community. We may be playing, having fun, talking, but as soon as something happened, its focus came very seriously, and they would get out, go over, they'd explain to those who were being arrested that they had rights and what their rights were, and that they didn't have to do their name or phone number or take the fifth. If they got arrested, we would try to bail them out, which did on many occasions. And that sometimes the police would want to know what you're doing there, and they would explain that we have the legal right by the Constitution, as long as we stand a certain distance away and not interfering with the arrest. And so that became a very annoying thing to them, because it became very intense at times, very intense. And so that's when they began to come together to get this right-wing assemblyman to change the local gun ordinance. That's why it went to Sacramento thereafter. It's for that purpose, yeah. To observe what was going on, that legislation. It wasn't going there to invade the Capitol. It wasn't like that at all. And plus we had this executive mandate, number one, that talked about the prison camps that they were planning for black and brown people of color in this country. Today you call it the prison industrial complex. So that was executive mandate number one. But when we went there, it just so happens that Ronald Reagan, then the governor of the state of California, was on the lawn having a press conference about 10 feet away from where we are. Soon as the press seen Bobby Seale and us there, they gravitate from him over to Bobby. And Bobby read that executive mandate and explained why we were there, to go to observe the legislation that was being passed. We went into the Capitol. There was no violation of the law. They opened the door and walked on in, couldn't find the chambers of where the laws were being gone on, and the press was all around us. Finally, the press found out. We went upstairs to second floor where the chambers were, and the first one to go into the chambers was the press. First thing they said is, "Get the press out of here." We followed right behind them, the Panthers, and got with the technical equipment, and they said, "Get the guys out of here." So we turn and we leave, and we go back on out on the lawn, about 5 or 10 minutes, and we leave. And we drive, I think, a couple of blocks or more to a filling station. And when we was getting gas and had the guns and was putting them in the trunk, all those kinds of things, and a police came by on a motorcycle. And he looked over and seen all these black men with his gun. He got on his next thing you had helicopters and all, and then that's when everybody came down from Sacramento on us. And they took the guns and tried to make them in violation of the local gun ordinance, jammed them up, did all they could do, and they arrested us. But to make a long story short, we went back and forth to court. You had this demand growing because all across the country, people want to say we want to join the Panthers and what have you. But now we got to spend this time going back and forth to Sacramento. So now what happens is that it was about 19 or 20 of us. They didn't know who, they knew only Bobby Seale, I think, and a few others who had guns. They didn't have a case, so they said, well, we'll make a deal. You plead to a misdemeanor, a non-supervised misdemeanor, and you can go, meaning that we wouldn't have to report to the back and forth to a probation officer. They just wanted us to plead guilty to the misdemeanor. And it was agreed to do that because we've been going back and forth to Sacramento for almost a month or so. And the party this is infant days of the party, and it's growing. And you need everybody to be working and doing what needs to be done. So they didn't know who all, so they said, we want 7 to 11 people to plead guilty to the misdemeanor. I was chosen as one of those to plead guilty to the misdemeanor. So when we went into court and we pleaded, that's how you plead, we said guilty, and we turned around to walk out because we thought that was it. And the judge said, no, y'all going to jail. It set us up. So we went to jail. Yeah. He said, yeah.
Wow, that's quite a story, Emory. Thanks a lot for sharing those details with us. That's amazing.
But there were men and women. That's another thing people don't understand. A lot of people think there was all men. You had the Denzel Dow family. That was the picture that I shared on the first flyer. That was the newspaper. His young man was Denzel Dow, who got murdered by the Richmond police. And Bobby Seale and you and them had been referred to the family, saying that whoever referred thought they could help them, assist them with that issue. Yeah. So their family, sisters and brothers, was a part of that going to Sacramento. There's a picture of Bobby Seale's first wife that they barely show of her behind the car when we were at the filling station. Also, there was a meeting before we went with everybody in Oakland that morning, explaining why we were going to Sacramento, what the purpose was, to go there to observe that legislation. And it was not there, we were gonna carry the guns legally. When we put them in the trunk. And once we got there, we'd take them out the trunk and we would carry them illegally into the building. And so that's what took place. Everything was legal. Everything, it wasn't like this was just a group of gangbangers got together and went into the chat. It wasn't none of that. And it was always about defending the community against police abuse. That was it. That was the framework and context of the self-defense.
Okay, another question from Brenda. She says, thank you so much, Emory. Last question, how do you think we can bring arts into our communities, the hood, that don't offer many arts opportunities? How did you learn or become involved in the arts?
Well, I guess you could say like just anybody as a kid, just playing around, not doing nothing that's relevant, maybe drawing on whatever I could. Nothing that had to do any issues because different ways and people are exposed to different levels of social interaction and politics, and you learn it just instinctively, intuitively by how you brought up when you go to school and how you treated, those kinds of things. but being in a structured program of art that had something to deal with social justice and quality of life issues, that wasn't how I became involved. That's how I got involved. Once I went to City College to learn my basic training and stuff, and while going there, being in the Black Arts Movement, being exposed to and working with then Emory Baraka, known as Leroy Jones, doing the simple props for the theater plays and stuff during that time. I became enlightened and informed about historical contexts of things that I never were aware of before. Then things did come up. All this plays, your whole life journey can play into, once you got an understanding and you're committed to what you're doing, how you brought up, what you recall can play a role in how you look at and want to do and be creative in the art forms. It's not necessarily that it just comes out of a moment. It may come out of a historical context of moments. Because I remember as a kid, I used to see these two black men. We had TV, and there's only 3 channels. And every time the news comes, it just so happened I would see these two black men on anytime they came to town. But I didn't know who they was, but I was always out because they was always on. And that was Paul Robeson and W.E. Du Bois. I remember that back in the day. And I do remember when he came to San Francisco, I lived about 2 blocks from where his office was, but I didn't know nothing about that. I was and he came there because they had been firebombed. And so he came out there and he was talking about it on the TV during that time. Yeah. So, all that comes back to you growing up when you see in the early 60s, the civil rights movement, Medgar Evers, when he was murdered. Also, you got the you're seeing all the things that are happening on the water hoses being sticked on the marchers, being beaten down with the billy clubs. Then you see sometime on the national news in South Africa, the same thing. The water hoses being sticked on the marchers, the tanks, the beat down. That, once you became more aware, becomes informed the context and along with the immediate situation that you've observed in the police murders being justified, what have you. Then when just so happens that at being in the right place at the right time, being involved in the Black Art Movement, going to the meeting and connecting with Huey and Bobby, and they had a vision about the newspaper of telling our story from our perspective, being like it'd be like a double-edged sword, praise you on the one hand and criticize you on the other. But they also had the understanding that the community was not a reading community, but they learned through observation and participation. And wasn't going to read the long drawn out articles, not everybody. And so they say that's where you will come in as the artist. You will be drawing the artwork, and they will get the gist of what the story from looking at the artwork and the photographs and the large captions. And so I was able, over a period of time, to develop the style that I did, interconnected with the politics of the Black Panther Party and the 10-point program, which everything evolved around and came out of. So it was inspired by and being in spirit with what was taking place. Is now that in the context of young people and art programs, you just, in many cases, you have to figure out how you can come together with like-minded folks and do it on the scale that you can do it on, and try to be consistent with it, and hopefully it can evolve and develop from there. But you just have to come together and do it. That's the whole ideal of the Baptist, was trying to set the example, guiding. Vanguard means vanguard revolution, leading by example, and then the community perhaps will follow and begin to want to be inspired to do some of the same things. They may agree or disagree with you, but they would do it themselves in many different ways. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. If not us, then who, right?
Yes.
Yep. I think that's all the questions we have. I have a couple of quick announcements here. For those of you who aren't aware, Emory's work is still on view at the KCAI Gallery, the Center for Contemporary Practice, on campus, and that's going to be on view through December. Some reproductions of some of his earlier works and some of his more recent work is on view there. And then starting tomorrow through December, the results of a poster workshop that Emory worked on with a handful of printmaking, graphic design, and illustration students will be on display alongside Emory's work. So be sure and check that out at the KCAI Gallery. And then a week from tonight, Thursday, November 5th at 7 p.m., there's going to be a roundtable, and we'll circulate this through KCAI email community. A roundtable with Emory, local artist Michael Toombs, um, labor organizer Michael Enriquez, and a handful of KCAI students. We're going to be talking about identity, power, creative expression, and protest. So be on the lookout for emails about that. And with that, Emory, we thank you so much for your time this evening. I'm sure everyone had an excellent experience, and we really appreciate you taking the time and the energy to spend with us this evening.
Well,
So
thank you.
everyone, yeah.
No,
Thank you.
thank you. And I'm glad I was able to find out what I was doing wrong in the beginning. I don't think you caught that first part. I heard my phone ringing, but it was way in the other room.
Well, yes, we're all glad that you figured it out as well. So we appreciate that. That's provides a good laugh, right? So, all right. Well, everyone, have a good night. Thanks for showing up. We appreciate it.
Okay, take care.
Take
Peace
care, Emory.
out, everyone. Okay.